Hello all, welcome to my YouTube channel or my blog or wherever you happen to be watching this video on. My name is Jesse Segun-Oside. I'm being sponsored by First Leader Soft, and we're currently talking about automation processes as they relate to C#, and specific with a tool called Selenium. So for those of you who are not familiar with testing procedures and how testing works and things like that, I can explain that. But for those who aren't familiar with programming languages, what software is, and things of that nature, they should probably try and do some more research on that, because this topic may be a bit too advanced for those who don't really understand the more fundamental and basic concepts of software design. But in relation to testing, we can talk about that really quickly. So when a company is developing software, essentially, a process that it's called the software development lifecycle begins, right? So the company gets basically a list of requirements, or some people that work in the company on the business side get a list of requirements that the application has to fulfill and meet. Those list of requirements are then passed over to the development team, or the people who will then build the application. And maybe 10 years ago, at that point in time, the developers would then get the application and start designing. It would be built and put together based on a list of requirements, and then after 4 or 5 months of work, depending on how big or small the application is, it will get tested for a couple more months, and then released to the public in a desktop application format, or web-based format. Although a decade and a half ago, the desktop-based applications were the way to go, versus now, where browser-based applications are usually the way to go for most companies. Most companies are moving even their desktop-based applications to browsers, or to web-based applications. And so because of that transition, there's a new method or methodology of software development that kind of came into play, called the Agile methodology. The previous methodology is known as waterfall, whereas the newer, faster-paced version is called Agile. So in an Agile methodology, the project gets worked on in a period of time called sprints. So essentially, from the start date to the end date of the project, the development team works in a period of it's usually around 2 weeks. Sometimes it could be 4, sometimes it could be 1, just depends on the application. But it works in sprints. And during those sprints, instead of working on the entire application as a whole, the development team works on single features at a time. So for example, if in relation to Facebook, maybe the development team is working on this specific feature, like stickers on Facebook Messenger. They're working specifically on how stickers work, how they're implemented, what they look like once they're sent, what it looks like when you're selecting a sticker, and things like that. All the testing for those features also happens within those 2-week sprints. Now, in the past, or even currently, most testing of any application is done manually, which means that once a feature is out, that a tester or quality assurance analyst will come in and essentially test the feature to make sure that it's working as specified by the requirements. This is a very meticulous and thorough process, and testers don't just jump into the process. There's something called a test case, which is designed and written by the tester to make sure that all aspects of that feature are being tested. Now, since this is time consuming and there are several hundred things that you could test on the specific feature, once it's done, you don't really want to revisit it. However, once sprint 1 is done, we now have to move to sprint 2, and we're now developing and testing new things. But software development, code, things break. So if something breaks during sprint 1, we now have to backtrack and waste time that should be dedicated to sprint 2 to fix things that are happening that were created and were working fine in sprint 1. And because of that, the need for automated testing came into being. So automated testing is essentially the ability to write script or code that would do manual tests for you instead of you doing it yourself. So something that usually would take a couple hours to test can be tested in seconds, minutes even. And a suite of 1,000 2,000 tests could be tested in a couple of hours by the system if the code is written correctly and everything is in order. So my job, or the job of an automation test engineer, essentially is to convert manual test cases that can and should be automated into automated tests. Now, not everything that's manual should be automated, and there are several reasons behind that, which I can talk about at a later time. However, the important thing for us to understand right now is just that automation is the process of converting manual tests that should be automated into code that will run the test for us. Now there are several ways to do this. There are tools like the tool you can see on the background of my screen, Visual Studio. Visual Studio is actually a platform to write code and design software. The tool that allows us to automate, especially in an agile environment, for UI or user interface based applications, is called Selenium. So there are several different levels to automation, right? A developer writes code or writes, a feature of an application. There's a process called unit testing where the developer writes tests after every small step that he takes to make sure that the code he's just written works. We want a lot of those. When you're in the office, you want to make sure that developers are writing a lot of unit tests. They're very important, and the more unit tests we have, the less chances we have of the application breaking in the future. Above that, we have API level tests, or tests that or code that tests bigger blocks of information, or bigger features, things that are more complex than just like a button or an image. Things more like test this login function, test like a business idea, like an idea almost. So API level tests test more like ideas as a whole. Or web services tests and performance tests that above that run against, like, considering that everything's on browser based and web based. There's a lot of web traffic and security issues that come about in web and software testing, and that's usually where that domain of testing is handled. So ethical hacking and things like that, those are the kind of things that go into that level. And then a level above that is called UI testing or user interface testing. This kind of testing is what tests usually the buttons, the text boxes, just making sure the images are loaded correctly, things that the user actually sees on the application. Hence, it's called user interface, or UI testing, or user interface testing. A tool that we'll specifically be working with in this series is called Selenium. Selenium is a tool that allows my code, the code that I'm going to write in Visual Studio, to interact with the application that exists on a web-based platform, right? So functions like typing or clicking will be done by Selenium with code that I write. It's all pretty straightforward. It's not too difficult. We're going to get through this together. If anything sounds hard or complicated, be free to post a comment or let me know, and we can be sure to talk about it at another time. But as of right now, we just want to make sure that you understand what exactly we're here to talk about. This is part 1, guys. Thanks for watching. Come back for the next video where we're going to get more into how exactly all this happens and the tools, and more exploration or more visuals on the tools that we'll be using during the process. Thank you.